A lot is going on in the world today, apparently, including a battle with BRICS, and we'll get to that and talk about that and see who else appears on World Edition to talk about a number of these issues that are going on. The Syrian government has counterattacked as rebels push forward, and some people are asking who are HTS, the rebels leading the Syrian offensive. So definitely looks like those rebels have seized control of Aleppo, Syria. So definitely that is something going on in the news as well. And definitely, it looks like there was a division over whether to stop making plastic, and UN treaty talks collapse. That happened earlier this morning, and everything. And oil producers apparently blocked a binding UN treaty to curb plastics because countries were calling for binding targets to cut plastic production after the initial talks had failed. And apparently, Saudi Arabia is leading the pushback against the global plastic treaty. And the Georgian president seeks Euro support as she defies her own government. So pro EU protesters clashed with police in Georgia, and Georgia is being rocked by days of violent protests over there in Eastern Europe. And definitely that's why lots of folks are paying attention to that part of the world. And Omar Nutra, thought to be a hostage in Gaza, died on October 7th, IDF says. So, American Israeli soldier held hostage in Gaza was killed on October 7th, Israel says. So, definitely it looks like that is a confirmed death that took place. And I'm assuming that might have been October 7th of last year when that horrible attack took place. And Syrian and Russian jets step up strikes on rebels after opposition seizes much of Aleppo, as I said. And Syrian and Russian forces are stepping up air raids in a bid to slow the opposition advance. So definitely Syria's civil war reignites in dramatic fashion as Russia joins the airstrikes on rebels who seize Aleppo. And Al Jalana is the leader behind the Aleppo attacks, and reportedly he was killed in a Russian strike yesterday. And a landmark climate change case will open at the top UN court. So a handful of countries are responsible for climate crisis, the top court is told. And Veneto urges the world court to recognize climate change harms. So definitely that's something going on in the world as well. An Iran-backed militia sends reinforcements to bolster Syrian regime against the rebels. So Iraqi military enters Syria to reinforce government forces, according to military sources in that area. So, and two killed as Lebanon accuses Israel of multiple ceasefire violations. So, Iraqi militia deploy in Syria to back the government's counteroffensive against the insurgents. And the Philippines, Marco says the presence of a Russian submarine is very worrisome. So the unique Russian submarine was spotted in the South China Seas, and the Philippines has deployed Navy ships and warplanes. So definitely that's something that we're seeing as well. And the ICC president says War Crimes Tribunal is in jeopardy. So the chief of the International Criminal Court lashes out at the U.S. and Russia threats and attacks. Well, I'm sorry, ICC president calls U.S. Russia threats and attacks appalling. So definitely the ICC president criticized U.S. and Russia over threats and accusations. And it looks like Trump is threatening 100% tariffs on BRICS countries if they pursue creating new currency. So definitely Trump is threatening 100% tariffs on the BRIC bloc of nations if they act to undermine the US dollar. So that's something that's going on in the news as well. And some folks are saying that Trump weaponizing the dollar is seen as a needless BRICS provocation. So we'll see how other folks react to that as well. But definitely it'll be interesting to see what goes on in that space. And Australia's biggest cocaine bust seized from a broken down boat at sea. So Australian police arrested 13 and seized 2.3 tons of cocaine on a boat. So definitely that was a record amount for them. They're saying that police arrested 13 in the largest cocaine bust in that country's history. So definitely we'll see what goes on in there. And the French government is to adopt a social security bill without a vote. So stocks rise, the euro stems losses as French Prime Minister budget concession to save the coalition. So Le Pen squares off with French government and markets in a budget showdown. And the centrist party edges out far right challenger in Romania. So Romania leftists win a parliamentary election amid uncertainty over presidency. So that's something else that we're seeing as well. as so Romanians vote in a parliamentary election amid turmoil over looks like claims of Russian interference. And Biden travels to Africa where policies were overpromised and underdelivered amid massive China expansion. So apparently Biden's in Angola, and I'm sure he'll stop at some other countries as well. And it looks like this is a last ditch African trip. So Biden's long awaited African trip to tout a win against China. So we'll definitely see how this all plays out, and even what Trump's relationship with Africa will be as well. Dozens, including children, were killed in a stampede following the clashes at a Guyana soccer match. So definitely, it looks like several folks died for stampede during a football match after the referee awarded a controversial penalty, and all along those lines. So definitely, we'll see what goes on in that space. And ID strikes Hezbollah amid truce violations, and France said accusing Israel of transgressions. And Taiwan's president meets the Hawaiian leaders in visit condemned by China. So Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te is in Hawaii, and definitely we'll see. Who knows? Maybe they'll even meet with Trump. But I don't know if that's on the schedule or not. But we'll say what goes on in that space. But they are in Hawaii. And U.S. Navy ships repel attack from Houthis in the Gulf of Aden, and Houthis fire barrage at passing American convoy. So that's something else we're seeing in the news as well. And Iran throws its support behind Assad as rebels expand their shock offensive in Syria, as I was saying earlier as well. And it looks like the Ukraine is using cheap AI-guided drones to deadly effect against Russia. So Ukraine is relying on drones to hold back Russian advances. Troops on the front line are fearing the worst, according to a report that was made last week. So Ukraine sees use of uncrewed ground vehicles and AI targeting drones surging next year. So they're looking at even doing more of these kinds of attacks as well. So definitely a lot going on in that part of the world. By the way, UN is calling for $2.6 trillion investment to reverse land degradation. So definitely that's something else that we're seeing as well at the COP16. So definitely land degradation is expanding at 1 square kilometer a year, according to a latest study. And Belgium becomes first country to give sex workers robust labor rights and protections. So Belgium sex workers win maternity pay and pension rights in the world first. So it looks like they're going to be getting some rights there in Belgium, and all along those lines, even the sex workers. And Australia banned social media for everyone under 16. So definitely that is something that was in the news as well. And the Australian Prime Minister says Musk is pushing agenda after a social media ban. And Ireland's main party edges out Sinn Féin, according to early election results showing. So the Irish center-right parties to seek a coalition deal as Trump threat looms. So definitely we've got elections all over the world, including those in Ireland as well. So definitely a lot's going on in the world, including the various conflicts and all along those lines. So lots going on. Let's see what's happening in the U.S., and then I'll see who's with me and what they've got on their mind as well. But definitely a lot is taking place in the world and in world events. Republicans are fuming after President Joe Biden pardoned his son, Hunter. So definitely anti-Trump commentator says Biden's pardon of Hunter is just deflating. So definitely with Hunter's pardon, Biden joins a short list of presidents who absolved family members and all along those lines. So definitely it's be interesting to see how that goes on. And you know, we are in the second day of December, the last month in 2024, and apparently a New York community got almost 4 feet of snow, and more is on the way. So that's what it's happening in Erie County. So definitely looks like there might be some snow for folks that want snow in terms of a white Christmas and all along those lines. But of course, it would have to stay for a while. I was watching one of the weathermen here, and they said that even if we got snow flurries, the ground is too warm, so they would not stick, and all along those lines. So it doesn't look like we'll be having any anytime soon, even though we are in the middle of a cold snap that's supposed to last for about a week or two. But I don't think it'll be any snow that is part of this. And it looks like Trump has chosen FBI critic Kash Patel to remake the agency. So definitely, some Republicans are backing Kash Patel to lead the FBI. So definitely, uh, and the GOP senator, one of them, has praised current FBI director Christopher Wray and called Putin a tyrant as well. And in one of the news stories I was watching, I think Christopher Wray would have to retire in order for the new FBI director to come in, because I think his term has not expired and would not expire under the Trump administration. And I think he was appointed by Trump as well. But that's something I was seeing on one of our news competitors. Everyone hates healthcare stocks, and Trump will decide the future of government money for healthcare plans. Letting it expire could save money, but the middle class might pay more, according to some folks' thoughts, and all along those lines. So a lot's going on in the world and all along those lines. And Gara Jolfi drops out of the race for the top Democratic spot on the Natural Resources panel. And 5 remain missing in Alaska after a fishing boat capsized in that area. So folks are still searching for the 5 people that are missing there as well. And bodies of 2 dogs believed to have belonged to the murdered Oregon hiker have been found. So traffic discovery in Oregon, missing hiker's body found, and husband has been arrested on murder charges. That was one of the cases coming out of Oregon. And Gavin Newsom, has proposed a $25 million from state legislature to Trump-proof California. So California lawmaker will propose a $25 million fund to litigate the incoming Trump administration. So definitely this will be interesting to see how that goes as well. And some folks are saying jobs was just the beginning. Now trans rights are being tested at the Supreme Court as well. So in a transgender care case, Supreme Court to consider how far equal protection goes. So first transgender attorney to argue before the Supreme Court challenging the healthcare ban for minors. So definitely it looks like a lot is going on in that space. And by the way, Trump has tapped his daughter Tiffany's father-in-law, Mossad Abalos, as senior advisor on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. So like I said, a lot's going on in the U.S. as well. So a lot's happening in the U.S. and worldwide. So we'll get to folks and see what they've got on their mind. I've got Rick Rosner with me. I've also got Jatovi with me, and I think I've got Nick with me, but we'll see if he joins us because he was having that old Donald Duck voice thing going on. But we've got, yeah. Right.
Well, where do we want to start today? Should we start with Joe Biden lying like every?
Do you want to start with Joe Biden, or do you want to start with BRICS? Because you and Kim were always talking about BRICS. So
I guess he said specifically, "I'm not going to pardon my son," and guess what he did? He pardoned his son. So it was typical, another Democratic lie. And so the thing is, the whole party is just a party of lies. I mean, the guy has no integrity whatsoever. So I'm glad he's leaving office. Unfortunately, you got another guy bad coming in. And then this transgender garbage, okay? So Idaho decided not to play against San Jose State because they had a male playing, and rightfully so. And then the NCAA puts all this garbage out. Oh, we got to treat people equally. Oh, no, you don't. This whole thing with Jefferson, all men are created equal, is a myth. It's not true. And you can see that with the transgender person. That transgender person needs to go play for the men's or get the heck out. And they need to just abolish this whole Title IX thing altogether, which is just pure garbage. I mean, the thing is, they do not allow, it's like, oh, we got to give transgender rights. Yet intellectual people, like chess players or smart guys like Rick, we get stomped on by their same incredibly stupid system. So hopefully, we'll see the light and get rid of this whole transgender rights garbage.
I'm sure Jacoby will disagree with you.
Let's start out with the complaint about Joe Biden, how ridiculous it is to complain that a father is not going to pardon his son. In the meantime, while ignoring the fact that Donald Trump has legitimately lied, and there was no complaint there about how he's not going to do particular things like utilize the government to go after his enemies. Hence the reason he installs Kash Patel as the head of the FBI, wanting to, fire the individual there that he actually hired when he was first time in office. So we try and make a news story out of something that would happen with anyone while ignoring the actual news with the Cash Patel thing. And then on top of that, to talk about the transgender rights, that's crazy because it's obvious that Nick is only pointing to transgender women, but has nothing to say about transgender men. And his argument is very, very flawed. So, I just wanted to push back a little bit on those two things because it's obvious. Nick woke up this morning drinking.
Well, maybe that's what happened and everything. Just really quickly, along those same lines, and I wanted to bring this, maybe Rick's got some thoughts, but there's been a sense of nepotism in the new administration as well, because I think it's like at least two in-laws that are now having jobs, including Tiffany's father-in-law that will be running things for the Middle East. I forgot the other one, but there's at least a couple of in-laws.
No, yeah, let's talk about Charles Kushner, the new ambassador to France.
Right, that's the other one.
Trump pardoned him in 2020. Kushner went to prison and then a halfway house for 2 years for, so he makes $600,000 worth of illegal campaign contributions. He's getting prosecuted. His brother-in-law is cooperating with the feds. So Kushner hires a prostitute to seduce the brother-in-law and get tape of this, and make video of them having sex. And then he sends the video to his sister to wreck the brother-in-law's marriage. Chris Christie, who was the prosecutor, called it, a disgusting and despicable crime. And this is who Trump appointed our ambassador to France.
Yeah, definitely.
So for every Hunter Biden that Biden has pardoned, Trump has pardoned, like Dinesh just has pardoned half a dozen pieces of crap.
Yeah, definitely a lot of people getting pardoned and everything. A question for you, Rick, because I know one of your favorite topics is the sex industry and what's going on in that world and everything. And one of the stories that I mentioned before we get to BRICS, I definitely want to hear Sasha's thoughts on this, is apparently in the smaller country of Belgium, the sex workers have gotten rights. They now can have maternity leave, and maybe Nick's got some thoughts on this since he's a pension attorney, but they can also have pensions. And I've definitely watched some TEDx talks where people have wanted the rights for sex workers. So what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, in general, it's weird. Like, you got porn workers, you have sex workers. These are people who are, probably considered less shameful now than they were 20, 50, 100 years ago. But these are people who are doing things that people do in a marriage. That they're having, like, everybody has sex, or at least everybody wants to have sex. Yet these people make choices that, I'm going to have it on camera, or I'm going to have it with people who pay me to do it. And it's weird that we don't consider them as legit as, like a waitress or a physical trainer, just because, they're doing something for money that everybody does, but not for money.
But not for money. Yeah.
Honestly, Rick, if you think about it, I have to make my bed every day, and I don't do that for money. So it's essentially the same thing. Gotta wash my dishes. I don't do it for money. I do it to live in that house, or else I'm gonna get kicked out.
People do like to make the argument that when a woman marries a guy, and this is assuming that the guy's the bigger breadwinner, that the guy is paying for sex via marriage, and then the woman now owns half of his stuff, which is, it's kind of a lame old school argument, but at the same time, it's just really weird that sex in different contexts is either the holiest thing you can do, the sacrament of marriage, or it's the sleaziest thing you can do.
Yeah, that's what some people think and everything. Hey, Sasha, one of the things getting away from that topic that I said I was going to mention, I mentioned earlier, is apparently Trump is going after BRICS because he said that he's going to slap a 100% tariff on the BRICS nations if they try to create their own currency, and it's my understanding, it's been my understanding for months that they were already in the process of having their own currency. So are we going to ready to slap 100% tariff on Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and all the other nations that are part of BRICS? And what is your take on this notion, since you're in that investment field?
I don't know. I think it's quite unusual to threaten 100% tariffs. So basically, it means he's ready to kill all trades with these countries, and perhaps more, because there are more and more countries that are joining BRICS. So it will be like Indonesia, some very large countries. So I don't know how it's going to work physically. Another thing is creating a currency. I'm not even sure. I never heard they were trying to create a currency. They were talking about some kind of a crypto way of settling their payments to each other, but even that is not really going ahead for quite some time. So I don't know why he's emphasizing something that is far from happening. I mean, years, maybe even 10 years from ever happening. And because even if, let's see, they create a new currency, it will take some time even before they will start trade with each other in that new currency. But beside BRICS, nobody will accept that new currency naturally. They would prefer euros or US dollars. So part of their trades they will have to conduct in the whatever new currency will be, and then other half in euros and or dollars, and that will be making things even more complicated. So in Trump's 4 years term, that's definitely not going to happen. Now, by doing this announcement, he shows that for some reason he and or United States are scared of that new currency. Because if it's not, then why he's even talking about? So that, in my opinion, if before he was doing a lot of announcements from the position of strength, this one is definitely from the position of weakness, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Actually, I got a question for you, Sasha, on this. Now, this goes into gambling as well. And everybody Trump and all his acolytes and the MAGA crowd keep yelling that this is how he's doing his negotiations, and this is what he's not really going to do it. He's just threatening. Now, in gambling, if you show your hand, don't you lose?
Absolutely.
Yeah, looks like he's showing his hand. Yeah. Speaking of showing your hands and everything.
Something, if we are in the investment field, something very interesting is happening, that people who are getting close to Trump, their companies are doing tremendously well in the stock market, starting with Elon Musk. That was obvious. Tesla is flying or so on. But look at what happened a couple of days ago when Zuckerberg went to Mar-a-Lago to visit Trump. And his company, Facebook now, it's Meta. So it was under the threat of federal investigation and so much problems there. So he went there, he kissed his hand. And now, today, I noticed that the Meta stock is flying. Because by showing the Trump, getting on his knees, kissing his finger, solves all the problems.
Hey, speaking of that, hey, Jacoby, I saw that you had in your car earlier the dog. Maybe it's going to a vet appointment or something. But I was wondering, are you getting ready to drive down to Mar-a-Lago? Because a lot of the supposed enemies of Trump, including Zuckerberg and others, I think even Mark Cuban, have been heading down there to Mar-a-Lago to have this whole idea of visiting Mr. Trump before he comes into the presidency. So I didn't know if you were getting ready to make that trip and everything. So I know right now we're enjoying the cold weather of North Carolina, and it might be a little warmer in Florida. So Jacoby, you can really head down that way?
No, just going to a dog park. I'm staying clear of anything dealing with the Trumpster.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you on that at all. Rick?
So I just I did a little poking around at that trans volleyball player. She's used to be a dude. She's 6'1". Now 19 players on her team. 2 of them are as tall as her. 1 of them's taller. A couple of, volleyball players are not short. Like I'd say half of the players on the team are at least 5'11". I'm looking at her. She looks like 6'1", maybe 175. And I'd say that she's out beefed because volleyball players, they're tall, big girls by like a quarter, a third of the team. Like other teams are saying, well, she's so big and strong. It's like, yeah, you guys are big. Like, I mean, okay, there's a little bit of horseshoe with that.
I hear you. Don't remind me about that. Don't remind me about that volleyball and how tall they are and how good they can be. Because my alma mater ran into a buzzsaw called Creighton that beat them 3-0. But fortunately, they did get a bid to the volleyball tournament, which is going on. But there's a lot of other powerful teams like Stanford and Louisville. So we'll see who wins the volleyball championship that we sometimes air on this network. So we'll see what happens in that regards and all along those lines. So just wanted to.
Yeah, the whole transgender thing is just built out of the ew factor coming out of the religious community. None of it's really built on actual data, as you just pointed out, Rick. It's used as a tool to scare people at this moment. It's the same thing when people get upset talking about, oh, well, why are there so many gay people on TV? They're trying to indoctrinate. They're trying to train. So gay people have been on TV for decades and years. Guys have been kissing. Women have been kissing. That's in porn. People have watched porn since the beginning of time, and women have been kissing. The Christmas was built on a pagan religion, which paganism had orgies during that same period of time, which had men and women kissing at the same time. But again, that didn't make more people gay at all. That didn't make more people trans at all. Yeah. And the same thing with what I find funny is when people complain about gay people kiss or, two men kissing or two women kissing on TV thinking it's going to change people. Well, Mickey and Minnie have kissed on TV since forever, but that hadn't changed gay people to be straight. So why do they assume that it's going to turn straight people to be gay?
So I'm looking at the team. For one thing, she's not that dominant. Yeah, she scores a lot of.
Exactly.
She also makes a lot of errors. But if you look at the team picture where you have 18 team members showed up for the team picture, I would like to see, without knowing who she is, how many people would get it right? Because there are some other people who, if I were guessing, I would guess are the trans player.
Yeah, then people have. Yeah.
I mean, they'd probably miss it, and half of the guys that would try and guess would probably guess her that they would want to sleep with. And it's the same thing. You could put up the different pictures of trans men up, and people would assume that, okay, well, that's not really a woman, that's actually a guy. But your complaint is that they should go to the women's bathroom. Now you're looking at this trans man is now, in your opinion, supposed to go to a women's bathroom, and it looks just like a dude. It's just, it's all built on fear.
You're skating the
an illogical fear.
She or he belongs on the men's team, does not belong on the women's team.
I don't think there's no way she could make it if
they're too bad, Rick. The thing is, I can't make the men's volleyball team. I have asthma. You don't have unlimited rights in this country. I'm sorry. So too bad, so sad. She gets to cheer.
But let's be honest, Nick, you wouldn't make the women's volleyball team either. So too bad, so sad. I don't see the argument.
Too bad, so sad, and I don't really care.
If she identifies as a woman, she identifies as a woman, and if she wants to play as a woman and is not given an unfair advantage, so that would be the question, whether there's an unfair advantage. But I do have a question steering away from that topic and everything along those lines, because one of the things that's been going on in the news quite a bit, and I kind of mentioned it in the opening and everything, but there is a major issue in terms of climate that has been going on, but apparently the countries cannot get together. And apparently there is a powerful country that is one of the main ones that is pushing back and everything. So there has been no doubt, and there's a lot of people that have talked about it. I even had a guest talk about it on one of my own personal shows here on the network about the amount of plastic that is in the ocean and around the ocean and everything like that. But they don't want to stop making plastic, and they also don't want to apparently have a treaty around plastic consumption. So, and apparently Saudi Arabia, and I'll ask Sasha, because Sasha is more of the world travel. Why is Saudi Arabia pushing back against the global plastic treaty? And should we be concerned about the amount of plastic in the country and everything like that? Because apparently, as an oil producer, and I do know that plastic and oil are somewhat tied together, so maybe that's why Saudi Arabia is pushing back and everything. But what's the reason that Saudi Arabia is pushing back on this plastic ban, and what is your take on this whole notion of plastic as a problem?
Tell the truth, I never dig into the plastic issue and never thought of importance of that issue. So therefore, I could not be the right person to address it.
Yeah, fair enough. Any thoughts on that, Rick, and everything?
Well, yeah, plastic fucks us up. The little microplastics, and I mean, but a lot of stuff does. Every era has its things that kill you and give you cancer. And like, you know, if this were England in the 1900s, we'd be dropping dead from the soot in the air. So yeah, we should work to clear out plastic because it doesn't biodegrade. It just sits there and it gets in fish. We eat the fish, and eventually we'll have solutions for this. In the meantime, it's going to make us a little sick. In the meantime, we have a lot of great medicine that means that the stuff that used to kill us doesn't kill us. It's just one of the the drawbacks of living now.
Yeah, speaking of drawbacks and everything, and Sasha, I know you will know this one and everything, but Philippines Marcos, which is one of our major allies and has been an ally for a while, and this is the second generation of Marcos leadership, said earlier today that they are having some very worrisome thoughts because apparently there's a Russian submarine off of the Philippines coast, and Philippines is, like I said, a major ally and definitely a lot of ties to the United States. So does the United States and the Philippines need to be worried about this Russian submarine, or is this something that they don't need to be as concerned as apparently they are? Because he's the one that called it very worrisome. So what is your take on the Russian submarine off the coast of the Philippines?
I think Philippines have nothing to worry about. On the other hand, United States, they do have something to worry about, and they have to deal with that. So I wouldn't put Philippines and United States on the same level of reasons to worry about that.
So I mean, everybody could. I recommend the book Nuclear War by Annie Jacobsen, which is about how our protections against nuclear war are pretty threadbare. And the deal with submarines is they carry a ton of big nuclear missiles, and they're hard to locate. You know, if we're going to get in a nuclear exchange, which you don't want because it just takes a couple dozen nukes to devastate the whole, northern hemisphere. But at least with a nuclear exchange with land-based missiles, you know where they're coming from and you can target the missile silos. With a submarine, it can be right off our coast. It can launch a missile. That missile could get here in less than 5 minutes and wipe out an entire city. So yeah, it's cause for concern. It's cause for the U.S. and Russia, Soviet Union, used to each have 7,000 nukes ready to launch. And through decades of negotiation, we've reduced that number to 1,600 apiece. And those negotiations should continue, though it's unlikely they can with Putin in office. But that should be an objective for not just the U.S. and the Soviet Union, but every nuclear power on the planet, is to better our systems for preventing a nuclear exchange.
Hey, Rick,
Rick, can you correct me if I'm wrong? It didn't, isn't that embargo or that, there was that deal, the nuclear deal, I cannot remember the name of it, between the U.S. and Russia on that. Didn't we end that in?
Yeah,
I hate to say it. It was Trump's few years. First
I think
four.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, there's also. Let me recommend the show on Netflix, starring Kerry Russell from The Americans. It's called The Diplomat, and it's been on for 2 seasons. And it turns out at the end of 2 seasons, you find out it's not that what's been going on has to do with nuclear submarines.
Yeah. Hey, Rick, along those same lines and everything, and this is Sasha may have some thoughts on this as well as the Toby, and maybe even Nick will come back. But one of the big complaints about the economy of the United States is how much money we owe and how much in debt we are and everything. But I would think that a large organization like the UN doesn't exactly have a lot of money to be thrown around either. And I get the idea that land degradation is expanding and that could cause problems, including definitely famine and other issues, depending on how bad the land degradation is. But the UN is saying that they want to invest $2.6 trillion to reverse this land degradation. And I'm trying to figure out where they got the $2.6 trillion, because it sounds to me like they would be like the United States and would be basically a broke organization. But maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they got some mysterious money.
They don't have it. They recommend it, I'm sure. But the deal is that climate change isn't just a threat to low-lying areas around the world. It's also a huge business opportunity. And I believe that what's going to solve climate change is A, people making fewer babies because we're distracted, but B, that you're not going to change people's behavior. You're not going to change entire countries' behavior. Like China's still burning a ton of coal, but I think what's going to save us is technology. We're going to figure out technological solutions over the next 100 years that'll mitigate the effects.
Yeah, just question. This is based on something I was watching last night, and we can get back to some of the other news reports and everything. But like I said, I watch a variety of news sources, including some that are more right than left. And I was watching News Nation, or one of the News Nation's shows, after some of the sports activities yesterday, and they were actually asking which presidents should be reformed, like which presidents are, because there are a couple of new presidential biographies, including one, I think, on Woodrow Wilson and one on Lyndon Johnson and a number of others. So there were some folks that were thinking that Carter, Carter is still living and is definitely doing as well as he can be doing and everything, but that he should be rehabilitated. But they were also saying Nixon, and I think somebody said Hoover, and then they were saying that LBJ had been torn down a peg or two since the kind of glowing reviews that he had in the past. So I'm asking the three of you, and if Nick wants to join in as well, because that was actually one of our more popular shows when we had that, which president would you like to see rehabilitated because they have a bad reputation? So I just gave the 3 examples that they gave, which was the whole notion that Hoover, Nixon, and Carter got a bad rap.
So, I mean, it doesn't freaking matter. And almost every president gets rehabilitated over time. People think of them better 10 years after they were president than right when they were leaving office. Hoover's interesting because he was a good man and a smart man. He was a structural engineer, but he was totally not up to figuring out how to solve the Great Depression, which started under him. He was an austerity guy. We're not going to feed this problem, when it turns out that the way you more effectively get out of, you spend your way out of a depression, which the Democrats do. So
I'm sorry, Rick, keep going. I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, Hoover, a good man, but not a good president for what he was dealing with. Nixon, a pretty bad man, but somebody who listened to voters and started the war on cancer, he didn't believe in the EPA, but he started the EPA because he listened to the voters. Kind of a psycho, but very interesting because of his psychosis. Same for LBJ, like a lunatic. LBJ, as a power move, would call somebody into the Oval Office for a meeting. and he'd be taking a shit with the door open and talking. He'd take meetings while shitting to intimidate the people he was meeting with. Like, I can do this, and and he gave us the civil rights. He brought, he's the guy who decided that the JFK's objective was civil rights, and he made it happen, and that caused the Democrats to lose the South for the past 60 years.
Speaking of the South, and then I definitely want to hear from you, Sophie, just really quickly, because there's an interesting president that seems to be a walking contradiction. I mean, a lot of presidents are walking contradictions and everything, because apparently Woodrow Wilson is the reason that the 19th Amendment passed and was a supporter of the women's suffrage movement, but he was also a known avid Southerner and was not that big a fan of racial equality. So it seems like he was in favor of women's equality.
So they've been pulling his name off of buildings because of his racism. And I don't know the full set of accusations about his racism. But I mean, the craziest thing about him is that he got the Spanish flu probably, and he had a stroke probably. And for the last year, maybe 15 months of his administration, he was in a dark bedroom, and his wife would go talk to him and say, well, he wants this, but nobody got to see him. So it's quite possible that he was totally out of it, and his wife was the de facto president of the U.S.
Yeah. What you're going to say, Jacoby?
I was gonna I meant to chime in on what Rick was talking about, how it's big business with the land, because pointing out the fact that we're trying to we want to terraform Mars and we want to terraform the moon, but we need to terraform Earth, and the amount of money that's going to the projects to terraform both of those, the moon and Mars, that money, changing priorities, which usually happens around space, may end up happening, and the UN might get that money that they're asking for. And there is, like I said, like Rick pointed out, there is a big business there.
Yeah,
but
the biggest new industries of the next century are longevity, giving people extra decades of life, a multi-trillion-dollar business in the next 50 years, and a multi-trillion-dollar business in fixing climate change. Like, here's something you can do. You can, if you want to invest, you can buy a crappy little apartment on the most beautiful island in the world, Venice. It's cheap right now because everybody's afraid that Venice is going to be wiped out by climate change and also by tourists. And so you can buy an apartment in Venice for the same price as an apartment in Van Nuys. So if you believe in technology's ability to save the world, buy a joint in Venice and wait for technology to save it.
Rick, I have a question to you. Though, if you are thinking about that there will be a demand for some kind of longevity drug, so people will extend their lives well into 100 years old and 120, maybe even much more than that. What do you think about the idea to increase retirement age to 75 years from present 67?
Okay, so eventually, yeah. But right now in the U.S., life expectancy is what, 77, 78? Like, right. It's been going down. So, like, I don't think we need to do that now. Now, when Social Security was started in the 1930s, people had, it started at 65, and on average, people only used it for 2 years before being dead. And now, you start at 65 or 67. We've already raised it in a lot of ways to 67. People get 10 years before being dead, which makes it more expensive. And yet, if the whole country, if life expectancy in the world and in the U.S. moves up to like 83, 85, if people are healthy well into their 70s, then you're going to probably have to raise the retirement age, but not right now because we're not healthy and we're dying at 77, 78.
Hey, Nick, you're in Spain. Shaquille's in Australia, and Sasha's in Canada. So we got three different views of the world coming at us, not just the United States view. And this is something that I did not know, and maybe y'all can explain it better to me, because Rick just mentioned Social Security, and I know Social Security has been a big issue here in the United States, and I would think it would be a big issue around the world, but I don't. Unfortunately, I've not traveled the world the way that you three gentlemen have and everything. So I did mention earlier that the French government is to adopt a Social Security bill, apparently without a vote and everything. So is Social Security as big of a deal in other parts of the world as it is here in the United States? That's my question, as one who has not traveled the world as much as I would like and everything. So is Social Security seen as a big political deal the way it is here and everything?
The short answer to that question is yes, it is. In France, the normal retirement age is like in the early 60s, like 60. In Europe, most people get 30 days paid vacation if you're a worker. But in the countries of Europe, they're more egalitarian than the United States. The United States is a winner-take-all country. If you're the number one football player, you get all the money. If you're the number one basketball player, you get all the money. If you're the number 100 player, you're broke. And so the U.S. is very lopsided on it suits Shaquille very well, because the winner will take all at the tables and everybody else will eat hot laser dust. But that's not Europe. In Europe, they're more egalitarian. They don't allow people like Shaquille to rape, pillage, and plumage throughout the country at his own will, and then pound his chest and say how great he is to everybody else, and everybody else is scum. So instead, what they do, they have a tax system that levels the playing field, and they have a very egalitarian base here. It is not the United States of America. No way, no how.
Some countries don't even have a retirement age. They're experimenting with something called minimum basic income, and regardless of how old you are, the government just pays you for being alive, because they figure it's better that people, don't have to struggle for subsistence. If you want to work and make more money, fine. But if you don't, well, we'll give you a little money just so you can get by. Another thing countries like Sweden do is, if you're a billionaire and you get a traffic ticket for going, 20 miles, 20 kilometers over the speed limit, it's pegged to your income. So a billionaire, getting a ticket might be ticketed like $150,000. For a driving offense.
Yeah, Shaquille, what is your take on that in terms of Australia? Because I don't know the system in Australia for Social Security, and is it as effective or less effective than it is here in the United States?
Well, everything's more effective than what you have in the United States, with all due respect to the US. But just for the record, I made it in life in Europe, not in the US. I made it in Europe. So just think we should just put that one out there. Look, Europe lags behind the US in economic development and economic output, because I think they prioritize lifestyle and quality of life over productivity. So the US is more productive, and you have a population of people that are unhappy with the lack of social services. Hence the reason why I keep saying to America, if you guys want to have the sort of lifestyle that they have in Europe, you sort of need to change the tax code to reflect that. But Europe's also very competitive when it comes to corporate taxes, and places like Sweden and Denmark, or Sweden and the Netherlands, actually have special types of investment treatment where they put an artificial tax. It's almost like a wealth tax on assets, regardless of how much you make. Now, that means that if you are an active trader, for example, this can be quite attractive because you're not having to pay capital gains tax. So, there's a lot of different systems in Europe which can make it quite attractive, depending on what you're trying to do. But I think the lifestyle is great. I prefer the US. If taxes weren't an issue, I'd prefer the US, because I don't like the fact that Europe is a little bit heavy-handed. Things like no air conditioning, which I'm sure Nick is experiencing and learning all about. There's no air conditioning in most of Europe. They do have beautiful old buildings, like Rick said, with Venice, where you can open the windows and get that nice breeze. But when it's a hot day, it can be pretty stifling, and I'm not one that likes the heat too much. But other than that, great culture, great food, good place to live. And if you stay away from, if you're trying to get away from the woke stuff, stay away from the woke areas, and you can have that great lifestyle. If you're trying to get away from the ultra conservative stuff that you see in conservative parts of America, stay away from the conservative parts and go to the more liberal parts. I think a big continent with 750 million people, there's something there for everybody. So I can't speak highly enough about Europe, but if I had the choice, I'd live in the US.
Hey, Shaquille, just along those same lines and everything, because we talked about this on this network before and everything, and I'm curious to see your thoughts on this because it's a part of the world that you have traveled to and everything. So apparently Biden is going to take a long-awaited Africa trip to tout a win that he has, and I'm not sure what the win is, against China and everything along those lines. And I know that you have traveled to various parts of Africa with business and other concerns as well. So I just wanted your take on why it took Biden so long to go to Africa on this long-awaited trip, and also what Trump's view of Africa will be and whether he should be courting this part of the world and everything. So I just wanted your take on this last-ditch trip as he's now in his last month and about a couple of weeks and everything.
Well, perhaps he'll take his son with him, given that his son is a very law-abiding person as of earlier today. Look, I think Africa represents a fantastic opportunity for countries to get involved. I would like to see Africa and the countries and companies that go into Africa leave some of that revenue behind. I mean, at the moment, they take 10 or 15 trillion out of Africa. And, you know, there's a lot of poverty in Africa. There's a lot of wealth there too. There's a lot of poverty and the everyday person struggles. So it'd be nice to see some of these companies and this international people leave some of the wealth there. I do think it's important, actually, for the United States to expand its diplomatic and trade routes. And that does concern me because Trump's being a little bit isolationist. What we've seen is big countries like China start to expand their diplomatic footprint in Africa. And look, I don't think India is far away. I think India will very, very quickly, and the BRICS nations as a collective will very quickly start to build new trade routes. And, you know, things like building hospitals and schools whilst doing business with these places is something that we should be doing and not leaving to our competitors. So good luck to China and India and other places. But I think the United States and her allies need to stop being so ridiculous in their behavior internationally.
Shaquille, before you got here,
Africa has the most population growth of any continent. So if you're going to invest in people, you want to go to Africa because you don't have to pay them much now. And they're making more people than any other continent.
Well, I think it's interesting when you look at worldwide trends is that actually places where people are so-called struggling, that people can actually afford to eat and to live, and they kind of all just used to it. So they do have children. Whereas in the West, we're seeing across America, Canada, across Australia, New Zealand, most of Western Europe, we're seeing a trend of a lowering birth rate. And I think we definitely need to do something about that. As I said, there's a number of factors that come into play there. One is housing affordability, and two is you know, well, as Jacoby said last week, there's the medical costs if you're in the United States, but there's just the general lifestyle stuff. Can I actually afford to raise this kid? The Marriage Act, what happens if a relationship doesn't work out? You know, all of those sorts of things that come into play. I do think it's fixable, but it needs to have proactive action by government.
Hey, Shaquille, just speaking of proactive action, and we talked about this before you came on and everything, and folks had different views around it, but it's something you brought up in the past, and we've only got a few more minutes to go. What is your take on this notion of 100% tariffs on BRICS nations? Because apparently that's something that Trump has rolled out now, that he wants to put 100% tariff because he's particularly if they create a currency separate from the dollar and everything. So what is your notion around this notion of 100% tariff that Trump is rolling out? Because I know you've talked about BRICS as well.
I think that's fraught with danger. Tariffs hurt your exports. Retaliatory tariffs, I can see maybe sometimes in limited circumstances. My feeling would be that if he does do it, a future government, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, would roll it back. I don't really think it's going to work as intended. Maybe he only intends to have it there temporarily. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of tariffs outside of very limited circumstances. So, having said that, I think as JD Vance talked about, all the experts and talking heads over the decades that talked about how great free trade is, and it's hurt manufacturing jobs in the US. I mean, I'm one of those people that would suggest that consumers should be able to buy the product in the place that's cheapest for them. Why should they be forced to buy something more expensive that's produced locally? However, as I've said before in many shows, if you want higher wages, you basically have to force the consumer to do that, and you either stop imports or you tariff them. So maybe it's worth experimenting with. I mean, if you're going to change things up, but see what happens. As I said, I have some real concerns about it. I'm not sure that that's the right way to deal with it, but let's see how it goes. I mean, just quickly as well, many of the countries that he's talking about putting tariffs on, the US already has under sanction. So, I mean, if the sanctions aren't working, I'm not sure that tariffing their goods coming into the US is necessarily going to work. But
It really has a lot of sanctions on this. Russia, India, and China, we do not have a 100%.
Well, you've got 30% of the world's population under tariff. Sorry, I'll phrase that. You've got 30% of the world's economy under tariff, which represents 40% of the world's economy from last time I checked. It represents, I think, 30% of the world's population. So, that's a pretty significant number. What I'm simply suggesting is that the US just putting countries under sanction, how much does it hurt them when they've got other trading partners that are also under sanction? So putting a tariff on their goods coming into the US, well, they can still trade with the rest of the world. And you're going to start seeing a fracturing where countries are being forced to choose. So if you have a look at natural allies to the US in the Middle East, those countries are like, well, we want to do business with BRICS. We want to do business with the US. What are you going to do? Try to force them to choose? So, as I said, if you're going to put 100% tariffs on BRICS nations, well, okay, well, they'll just put 100% tariffs on American goods. Now what?
Would that not create a trade war and put us in an isolationist policy, or would that not isolate us in a trade war that would come about from that?
Fearmongers. We're not isolated. We still trade with Europe. Europe was not part of it. Okay, so
he said everybody. He's putting tariffs on everybody.
And no, we'll put them on the BRICS nation that anybody supports undermining the United States. I think it's a great idea. It collects revenue for the U.S. government. It stops the unfair advantage that these countries have using near slave labor, and they don't have trans rights over in China. I'm sorry, Jacoby.
So you can look the threat of you can look at the threat of tariff.
You should do it yesterday.
You can look at the threat of tariffs in terms of how freaked out the market is. And right now the market is fine. The Dow has gone up 5% since Trump got elected. So the people.
So let me just pop in on the trade war stuff. So yeah, Jacoby, I think you're right. I think there is a risk of retaliatory tariffs, but look, it's worth trying. I think I'll tell you why. If Trump can replace part of, he's never going to be able to replace it all, but if he can replace part of the income tax with an indirect national sales tax effectively through tariffing, well, look, that may be not such a bad idea because it simplifies the tax code. Maybe that's worth trying. If it doesn't work, you roll it back. So I'm not sure I have too much of a problem with that. I actually agree with Nick, and I've said this many times over the years. It's not fair when a country is able to employ people in conditions that are not as good as what our unions force our workers and our employers to provide their workers with. You can't have child labor. You can't have people that are sleeping on factory floors and then those companies undercutting, a domestic manufacturing or domestic jobs. That's not fair, and they should be tariffed. However, in the case where it's tariffing, Canada, as he's talked about, or, you're tariffing, England wants to sell something to you and England buys stuff from you and you put a tariff there. Not sure that that's such a great idea unless the tariff is coming as a result of you wanting to reduce taxes elsewhere in the economy. Like, for example, the UK has a VAT, Australia has a consumption tax, etc. So if tariffs are a way of creating a national sales tax without actually having a sales tax, maybe that's not such a bad idea.
Just really quickly, because we got to end and get to the economic show as media show and everything. But just to counter something that Nick said, and I do agree that there's a lot of rights issues that are going on in China that are horrible and everything. But apparently 5 days ago, so that would have been last week, a trans woman was forced to undergo electroshock conversion therapy and she won a record compensation. So apparently even in China, there are efforts to at least recognize some of the rights and things that can go wrong in the trans community, because she definitely won a record compensation in the Chinese court and everything. So there are efforts to protect certain rights even in countries like China.
I have to get to economics, so bid you guys farewell. Sorry, I was a bit late today. I had to be things on.
No problem. So like on that note, we're ready to get on out of here and see folks on economics and on Media Monday.